The mop hit the hardwood floor with a wet slap that echoed through the silent apartment like a gunshot. Jennifer Davis, 32 years old, skin the color of rich mahogany, didn't even feel her knees buckle before darkness swallowed everything whole. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Linda's Stories. If grace carried you through another day, like this video, if faith still lights your path even when the road gets dark, comment, "I'm with Linda." Today's story will shake you to your core. Let's begin. The clock on the microwave read 11:17 p.m. when Jennifer's body crumpled onto the living room floor of her cramped Manhattan studio apartment, the one she'd been cleaning for the past hour after coming home from her second shift at the diner on Amsterdam Avenue. Her fingers, still wrapped around the mop handle, twitched once and went still. The bucket of soapy water she'd been using tipped slowly, spilling across the floor in a widening pool that reflected the single overhead light like a dark mirror. Outside the window, the city hummed with its usual midnight symphony, car horns and distant sirens, and the rumble of the subway beneath the streets. But inside apartment 4B, everything had gone terrifyingly quiet, except for the steady drip, drip, drip of water from the overturned bucket. Mia Davis woke to the sound of something heavy falling. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with her mother's warm brown eyes and tight coils of black hair that Jennifer braided every Sunday night while they watched their favorite cooking shows together. The little girl sat up in the narrow bed she shared with her mother, pushing aside the worn comforter decorated with faded unicorns that they'd found at the Goodwill on 23rd Street last winter. Her heart was already racing even though she didn't know why yet. That animal instinct that tells you something is wrong before your brain catches up. She called out softly into the darkness, "Mama?" No answer came back. Just that awful silence that felt thick and heavy like something pressing down on her chest. Mia's bare feet touched the cold floor, and she padded toward the main room, her pink pajamas with the little stars on them suddenly feeling too thin against the chill that seemed to have invaded their small home. When she rounded the corner and saw her mother lying there on the floor, limbs at strange angles, one arm stretched out toward the fallen mop like she'd been reaching for something, Mia felt her entire world tilt sideways. Her mother never lay on the floor. Her mother was always moving, always working, always tired, but always there, always strong. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. And any second now she'd wake up to the smell of eggs frying and her mother's voice singing along quietly to the gospel station on the radio. "Mama!" The word came out as a scream this time, and Mia ran to her mother's side, dropping to her knees in the puddle of spilled water that soaked through her pajama bottoms. She shook Jennifer's shoulder hard enough that her mother's head lolled to one side, but those eyes stayed closed, the lids not even fluttering. Mia pressed her small hand against her mother's chest like she'd seen them do in the medical shows, and felt the heart beating underneath. Thank God, thank God, thank God. But something was wrong with her mother's face. One side of it looked different, droopy, like melted wax. And when Mia touched her mother's hand, it felt cold and limp and nothing like the warm, strong fingers that braided her hair every week. The girl's training kicked in then, the safety lessons her mother had drilled into her head since she was old enough to understand. If something bad happens, baby, you call 911. You tell them your address and you tell them Mama needs help. You stay on the phone until they come. Don't hang up no matter what. Mia scrambled to her feet and ran for her mother's purse, the big leather tote bag that was falling apart at the seams, but Jennifer refused to replace because she said they couldn't afford luxury when they barely had necessity. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely unzip the inside pocket where her mother kept the phone, that old iPhone with the cracked screen that Jennifer had bought, refurbished 3 years ago, and babied like it was made of gold because replacing it wasn't in the budget. Mia's fingers fumbled with the power button and the screen lit up, showing her mother's lock screen photo of the two of them at Central Park last summer, both grinning at the camera with ice cream cones in their hands, back when everything was normal and Mama was healthy and the world made sense. The emergency call screen appeared and Mia's vision blurred with tears as she tried to tap the numbers. 911. But her hands were shaking too hard and the tears made everything fuzzy, and instead of hitting the number pad, her thumb pressed down on the contacts list and the first name that appeared was the one at the top. DH. Just 2 letters that Mia had seen hundreds of times but never understood, because whenever she asked about it, her mother's face would close up tight and she'd say, "That's nobody, baby. Just an old friend Mama doesn't talk to anymore." The phone was already ringing before Mia realized her mistake. She should hang up and try again, dial the actual emergency number, but her mother was lying there on the floor. And what if hanging up wasted precious seconds? And what if this person could help too? And before she could think it through any further, a man's voice answered, deep and rough with sleep and confusion. "Jennifer, what the hell? It's almost midnight." The voice was cultured, educated, the kind of accent that came from expensive private schools and summers in the Hamptons. Nothing like the voices Mia heard in their neighborhood, where everyone spoke in the rushed rhythms of people who had 3 jobs and no time. "Please!" The word burst out of Mia in a sob, and she heard the man on the other end inhale sharply. "Please, you have to come. Mama fell down, and she won't wake up, and I don't know what to do, and I'm scared. And please, please, please." The words tumbled over each other in a desperate rush, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Mia knew she should explain that she dialed wrong, that she needed 911, not whoever this was. But terror had stolen her ability to think clearly, and all she could do was beg this stranger to help her mother. "Who is this?" The man's voice had changed completely, sharp now, alert, and Mia could hear rustling sounds like he was moving fast. "Where's Jennifer? What happened to her? Kid, I need you to tell me exactly what's going on right now." There was something in his tone that made Mia feel like maybe he could fix this, like maybe he was the kind of person who solved problems instead of running from them, and she sucked in a shaking breath and tried to explain. "She was cleaning the floor, and then I heard a noise, and she's just lying there and she won't wake up, and one side of her face looks weird, and I'm really scared, and I don't know what to do." The words came out in a rush, punctuated by hiccuping sobs, and Mia wiped her nose on her sleeve, staring down at her mother's still form. "We live at 347 West 47th Street, apartment 4B, in Hell's Kitchen, and I need help right now because something's really wrong with my mama." "Jesus Christ!" The man swore under his breath, and Mia heard more sounds, car keys jangling, a door slamming. "Listen to me very carefully, sweetheart. My name is Daniel, and I'm coming to help you and your mom right now. But first I need you to call 911 for me, okay? Can you do that? Hang up this phone and dial 911 and tell them everything you just told me. Tell them your mother collapsed and you need an ambulance immediately. Can you do that for me?" His voice had gentled, but there was steel underneath it, the tone of someone used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "Okay," Mia whispered, but then something else spilled out of her mouth before she could stop it. Words she'd been holding inside for her entire life without even knowing they were there. "Are you my daddy?" The question hung in the air between them, transmitted through cellular towers and fiber optic cables across however many miles separated them, and the silence that followed was so complete that Mia thought maybe the call had dropped. "Mama has your name in her phone, and she won't talk about it. And I thought maybe you were my daddy because I don't have one, and all the other kids at school do, and I just thought maybe, what's your name?" Daniel's voice had gone strange, tight and controlled, like he was choking on something. Mia clutched the phone tighter against her ear, her free hand reaching out to rest on her mother's shoulder because she needed to touch her, needed to feel that she was still there even if she wouldn't wake up. Mia Davis. I'm 8 years old, and I go to PS 51, and my birthday is March 19th, and my mama's name is Jennifer Davis, and please just come help us, please." She was crying again, big gasping sobs that made her whole body shake. The line went dead, and for one horrible moment, Mia thought he'd hung up on her. But then she realized he'd just disconnected, so she could call for help like he'd told her to. Her hands were steadier now, maybe because someone else knew what was happening, maybe because she wasn't completely alone anymore, even if he was just a voice on the phone. This time she managed to dial 911 properly, and when the operator answered, Mia repeated everything, her address and her mother's condition, and please, hurry, please hurry, please. The woman on the phone told her to stay calm and keep her mother comfortable and don't try to move her, and an ambulance was on its way and should arrive within 6 minutes. Mia ended the call and sank down beside her mother again, taking one of those cold, limp hands in both of hers and squeezing tight. "Help is coming, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I called and they're coming, and that man Daniel is coming too, and you're going to be okay. You have to be okay, because I need you, and who's going to braid my hair on Sunday if you're not here? And who's going to make those pancakes with the faces on them? And Mama, please, Just wake up, please." But Jennifer didn't stir, didn't so much as twitch, and when Mia leaned close, she could hear her mother's breathing was weird, raspy, and uneven, like each breath was a struggle. The 6 minutes until the ambulance arrived felt like 6 hours. Mia sat there on the wet floor, holding her mother's hand, and crying and praying, even though she wasn't entirely sure who she was praying to, because they didn't go to church much anymore. Not since Mama started working double shifts, and Sundays became just another day to catch up on laundry and meal prep and all the things they couldn't afford to pay someone else to do. She could hear the sirens getting closer, that distinctive wail of emergency vehicles cutting through the city noise, and then there were footsteps pounding up the stairs because the elevator in their building had been broken for 3 weeks, and the landlord kept promising to fix it, but never did. The paramedics burst through the door that Mia had unlocked for them. 2 men in dark blue uniforms with patches on their shoulders and equipment bags slung over their backs, and they immediately took charge of the situation with the kind of calm efficiency that came from seeing tragedy every single day. One of them gently moved Mia aside, while the other dropped to his knees beside Jennifer, pressing fingers to her neck to check her pulse, and shining a light in her eyes, and rattling off medical terms that meant nothing to an 8-year-old girl. "Stroke," Mia heard. "Possible CVA. Unresponsive. We need to move fast." They lifted Jennifer onto a stretcher with practiced ease, and Mia wanted to climb up there with her mother, wanted to hold her hand and not let go. But one of the paramedics told her she had to ride in the front and buckle up, and they'd take good care of her mama. The ambulance ride to Mount Sinai West was a blur of flashing lights and sharp turns, and the terrible awareness that her mother was back there behind the partition, being worked on by the paramedics, and Mia couldn't see. Her couldn't touch her, couldn't do anything except sit in the front seat, with her hands clenched into fists so tight her nails dug crescents into her palms. The driver kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes kind but worried, and he asked her questions about whether she had family they could call, anyone who could come sit with her at the hospital. And Mia didn't know what to say, because it had always been just her and Mama. No grandparents that she knew of, no aunts or uncles, no cousins, just the 2 of them against the world. They pulled up to the emergency entrance, and suddenly everything was movement and noise and chaos. Her mother was being rushed through automatic doors that whooshed open with a hydraulic hiss, and Mia ran after them, but a nurse caught her by the shoulders and said she couldn't go back there. She had to wait in the family area, and would she like some water or maybe a snack from the vending machine? Mia shook her head violently, because how could she think about food when her mother was dying? And she must have said that out loud, because the nurse's face went soft with pity, and she knelt down to Mia's level. "Honey, your mama isn't dying. She's sick, and the doctors are going to do everything they can to help her. But you being upset isn't going to make her better. The best thing you can do right now is stay strong for her, okay?" Mia let herself be led to a small waiting room with uncomfortable plastic chairs bolted to the floor and a television mounted on the wall playing the news on mute. She sat down in the chair closest to the door because she wanted to see when they came to tell her about her mother, wanted to be ready to jump up and run to her side the second they said she could visit. The clock on the wall showed 11:53 p.m., and Mia realized that less than 40 minutes had passed since she'd woken up to find her mother on the floor. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like she'd aged years in the span of those minutes, like childhood had been ripped away and replaced with this terrible new understanding that the adults in your life weren't invincible, that your mother could just collapse and leave you alone and afraid. She was still sitting there staring at nothing when the waiting room doors burst open and a man strode in who could only be Daniel Harrison. Mia knew it was him before he even opened his mouth, knew it in her bones the same way she'd known something was wrong when she'd woken up to that awful sound of her mother falling. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark blonde hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and ice blue eyes that swept the room until they landed on Mia and went wide with something that looked like shock. He wore expensive clothes, even though they were rumpled now, dark slacks and a white button-down shirt, with the sleeves rolled up and no tie, and when he moved toward her, it was with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no in his entire life. "Mia." His voice was the same one from the phone, but different hearing it in person, deeper and rougher around the edges. He stopped a few feet away from her chair, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to come closer, and his eyes moved over her face with an intensity that made Mia squirm. I'm Daniel Harrison. You called me about your mother." He seemed to be struggling with his words, opening his mouth and closing it again like he couldn't figure out what to say. And Mia realized with a jolt that he looked scared. This grown man in his expensive clothes looked absolutely terrified, and she didn't understand why. "My mama's back there," Mia said, pointing toward the doors that led to the emergency department. Her voice came out small and shaky, and she hated it. "They won't let me see her. They said she had a stroke, and they're doing tests, and someone will come talk to me soon, but it's been forever and nobody's told me anything yet." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, and she wiped them away angrily because she was trying to be strong, like the nurse said, but it was so hard when she was scared and alone and her mother might be dying. Daniel's face did something complicated, emotions flickering across it too fast for Mia to identify, and then he was moving towards the reception desk with long strides that ate up the distance. Mia watched as he leaned across the counter and spoke in a low, urgent voice to the woman sitting there, and whatever he said made her sit up straighter and start typing rapidly on her computer. He pulled out his phone and made a call, pacing back and forth in front of the desk, and Mia heard fragments of what he was saying. "I don't care what time it is. I need Dr. Morrison here now. Yes, Mount Sinai West, stroke patient, Jennifer Davis, spare no expense, whatever she needs. I'm authorizing everything." He hung up and made another call, then another, and by the time he was done, the receptionist was looking at him with something close to awe. He came back to where Mia was sitting, and this time he did sit down, choosing the chair right next to hers, and up close, she could see the details her scared brain had missed before. He had a small scar through his left eyebrow, barely visible. His hands were shaking slightly where they rested on his knees, and when he looked at her, his eyes were so blue they reminded her of the sky on the clearest summer day, the kind of blue you could fall into and never find your way out of. "They're going to let us know about your mom as soon as they have any information," he said quietly. "I called in some favors and got one of the best neurologists in the city coming down here to look at her. She's going to get the best care possible, I promise you that." "Why are you helping us?" Mia asked because she didn't understand. Stranger danger was something her mother had taught her early. Never go anywhere with someone you don't know. Never give them information. Never trust them just because they seem nice. But Daniel didn't feel like a stranger, even though she'd never met him before. He felt like something else, something important, and that scared her almost as much as her mother lying unconscious in the emergency room. "You don't even know us. My mama never talks about you. Who are you?" Daniel's jaw clenched, and he looked away from her, staring at the muted television like it held the answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What did your mother tell you about your father?" The question hung between them heavy and loaded, and Mia felt her stomach drop because somehow she knew that whatever he said next was going to change everything. She twisted her hands together in her lap, the damp fabric of her star-print pajamas cold against her skin, and forced herself to answer honestly. "She said he didn't want us," Mia whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "She said he had a different life, and there wasn't room in it for a baby. And so she left, and it was just going to be me and her against the world forever. She said I didn't need a daddy because I had her, and she loved me enough for 2 parents. The tears were coming again, and Mia couldn't stop them. "But I see the kids at school with their dads, and they go to baseball games, and he teaches them to ride bikes and carries them on his shoulders. And I wanted that so bad, but Mama said I couldn't have it, and I should just be grateful for what I do have." Daniel made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach, and when Mia looked at him, his face had gone white, all the color draining out of it like someone had pulled a plug. "She told you I didn't want you." His voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly he was standing up, pacing away from her, one hand coming up to press against his mouth, like he was trying to hold back something that wanted to break free. "Jesus Christ, Jennifer, what did you do?" He wasn't talking to Mia anymore, was talking to himself or maybe to her mother who couldn't hear him, and Mia felt confused and scared and angry all at once. "Are you my daddy?" she asked again, louder this time, and Daniel stopped pacing and turned to look at her, and the expression on his face told her everything she needed to know before he even opened his mouth. He walked back slowly and sank into the chair beside her, and this time when he looked at her, it was like he was really seeing her, taking in every detail of her face like he was trying to memorize it. His hand lifted like he wanted to reach out and touch her hair, touch her cheek, make sure she was real, but he stopped himself and let it fall back to his lap. "I think maybe I am," he said. and his voice was thick with emotion that Mia couldn't identify. I think your mother and I need to have a very long conversation when she wakes up, because there are things that don't make sense and pieces that don't fit, and I need to understand what happened 8 years ago. He paused, his blue eyes searching her face, and then asked the question that seemed to be killing him. When's your birthday, Mia? Tell me exactly. March 19th, Mia said, watching as Daniel pulled out his phone with shaking hands and started typing something, his face going through a series of expressions that ranged from disbelief to fury to something that might have been grief. What are you doing? Why does it matter when my birthday is? But she thought she might know already, thought she might understand what he was figuring out, because she was good at math, and she knew how long babies took to be born. And if you counted backward from March 19th, 9 months, you ended up right around June, Daniel said flatly. Late June. That's when it would have been. That's when I last saw your mother. He looked up from his phone, and his eyes were blazing with something fierce and angry and hurt. We had a fight, a stupid, pointless fight about my family and their expectations, and her refusing to let me help her with anything because she was so goddamn proud and independent, and she couldn't stand the idea of being seen as someone who needed anyone. I said things I shouldn't have said. She said she was done, that she couldn't do this anymore, that loving someone who lived in a completely different world than she did was too hard, and she was tired of feeling like she wasn't good enough. And then she walked out of my penthouse and I never saw her again. He stood up abruptly and walked to the window that looked out over the dark city, his reflection ghostly in the glass. I tried to find her, he said, his voice hollow. For months I tried. Called her phone and it was disconnected. Went to her apartment and she'd moved and the landlord wouldn't tell me where. Asked all our mutual friends and nobody knew anything, or if they did, they wouldn't say. Eventually, I had to accept that she'd meant it when she said she was done, that she didn't want me in her life anymore. I threw myself into work and tried to move on and told myself it was for the best. He turned back to face Mia, and there was devastation written across every line of his face. But she was pregnant. She was carrying my child, and she didn't tell me. She let me believe she'd just decided I wasn't worth the trouble, when really she was protecting a secret that should have been mine to know. Mia felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. All those years of believing her father hadn't wanted her, that she wasn't good enough, that she was somehow lacking the thing that would have made him stay. And it was all a lie. Her mother had lied to her. Her mother, who she trusted more than anyone in the world, who she thought told her everything, had kept this massive secret and let Mia grow up thinking she'd been rejected before she was even born. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she'd ever felt and mixed with the fear for her mother's life. It was almost too much to bear. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but before she could find the words, a doctor in blue scrubs pushed through the emergency department doors and called out, "Family of Jennifer Davis!" Daniel spun around so fast he almost lost his balance, and Mia jumped to her feet, her heart in her throat. The doctor looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes and her hair escaping from its ponytail. But her expression was calm and professional as she approached them. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, the attending physician who admitted Miss Davis." "You are?" She looked between Daniel and Mia with obvious confusion, probably trying to figure out the relationship. "I'm Daniel Harrison," he said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear he expected to be recognized. "I'm the one who called Dr. Morrison to consult on this case. This is Mia, Jennifer's daughter. How is she?" The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Morrison's name, but she recovered quickly and gestured for them to sit down. She pulled up a chair across from them and leaned forward with her elbows on her knees, her expression grave but not without hope. "Miss Davis suffered an ischemic stroke caused by a blood clot, blocking blood flow to part of her brain," Dr. Chen said, speaking directly to Mia as much as to Daniel. "She's very lucky that you called for help so quickly, honey. The faster we can treat a stroke, the better the outcomes tend to be. We've administered TPA, a clot-busting medication, and we're monitoring her closely. Dr. Morrison will be here shortly to do a more thorough evaluation and determine if any additional interventions are needed." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "The next 24 to 72 hours are critical. We need to watch for any complications and see how much function she might have lost. It's too early to say for certain what her recovery will look like." "Can I see her?" Mia's voice came out small and frightened, and she hated how weak she sounded, but she didn't care. She just needed to see her mother with her own eyes, needed to know she was still alive, still breathing, still there. "Please, I need to see my mama." "Doctor." Chen's face softened. She's still unconscious, and she's hooked up to a lot of machines that might look scary, but if you think you can handle it, then yes, you can see her for a few minutes, but just for a few minutes, okay? She needs rest, and we need to be able to work. She stood up and gestured for them to follow her, pushing back through the doors into the controlled chaos of the emergency department, where every bay held someone's crisis, someone's worst day, someone's before and after moment. They found Jennifer in a room at the far end, curtained off from the corridor, and when they pushed through the fabric, Mia felt her breath catch in her throat. Her mother looked so small in the hospital bed, so fragile and breakable in a way Jennifer Davis had never been before. There were tubes everywhere, in her arm and her nose, and machines beeped steadily, tracking her vital signs. Her beautiful face was slack on one side, that same melted look that Mia had seen on their apartment floor, and her eyes were closed with dark circles underneath them that spoke of exhaustion that went soul deep. Mia rushed to the bedside and grabbed her mother's hand, that same cold, limp hand she'd held in the ambulance, and pressed it against her cheek. "Mama, I'm here," she whispered fiercely. "I'm right here, and you're going to be okay. You have to be okay because I need you and I love you, and please don't leave me." She was crying again, couldn't seem to stop crying, and she felt a hand come to rest gently on her shoulder, and looked up to find Daniel standing beside her with tears running down his own face. He was staring at Jennifer like she was a ghost, like he couldn't quite believe she was real, and his free hand reached out to touch her hair where it spread across the pillow, those tight black coils that were starting to come loose from her braid. "God, Jen," he breathed, his voice breaking. "What were you thinking? Why didn't you tell me?" But of course Jennifer couldn't answer, was lost somewhere in the darkness of her own damaged mind, and all they could do was stand there together beside her bed and hope that she'd find her way back to them. Dr. Cheng cleared her throat from the doorway. "I need to ask about next of kin and medical decision-making authority," she said quietly. "Mia, sweetheart, is there anyone we should call? Grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone who's legally responsible for you?" Mia shook her head mutely because there was nobody, had never been anybody except her mother, and she saw the doctor's face tighten with concern. Because an 8-year-old couldn't consent to medical treatment, and if Jennifer couldn't speak for herself, then they needed someone who could. "I'll take care of it," Daniel said, his voice suddenly hard and commanding. The voice of someone who made billion-dollar deals and moved markets with a word. "I want the best care available for Jennifer, and I don't care what it costs. Private room, round-the-clock nursing, whatever specialists you need to consult. Money is not an object. And as for Mia," he looked down at the little girl who might be his daughter, who shared his eyes and his stubborn chin and the small scar in her left eyebrow that he'd gotten falling off his bike when he was 6 years old. "She's coming home with me. She's my responsibility now, and I'm not letting her out of my sight until Jennifer wakes up and we can sort this mess out." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications and promises and threats and hope. And Mia felt her world shift yet again on its axis. Going home with a stranger, even if that stranger might be her father, should have terrified her, but somehow it didn't. Somehow the idea of Daniel Harrison taking care of her felt right in a way nothing else had, since she'd woken up to find her mother on the floor. She looked up at him with her mother's brown eyes that were currently swimming with tears and whispered, "Promise you won't leave too? Promise you'll be here when she wakes up?" Daniel Harrison knelt down beside her so they were eye to eye and took both her hands in his, and the steadiness of his grip was the first solid thing Mia had felt since this nightmare began. "I promise," he said, and there was steel in those words, an unbreakable vow. "I'm not going anywhere, Mia. Not now, not ever. You're stuck with me whether you like it or not, because if you really are my daughter, then I have 8 years of being a father to make up for, and I don't care if it takes the rest of my life." And despite everything, despite the fear and the confusion and the anger and the terror, Mia felt something in her chest unclench just slightly, because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. 3 hours later, the sun was starting to rise over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene in their beauty when everything felt so dark and wrong. Mia sat in the passenger seat of Daniel's black Mercedes SUV, still wearing her star print pajamas because there hadn't been time to go back to the apartment for her clothes, wrapped in a hospital blanket because she couldn't seem to get warm, no matter how high Daniel turned up the heat. They were driving toward the Upper East Side where Daniel apparently lived, toward a world that Mia had only ever seen in movies and television shows. The world of doormen in private elevators and square footage that cost more than most people made in a year. Dr. Morrison had arrived shortly after Dr. Chen's initial assessment, a silver-haired man in his 60s who radiated competence and calm authority. He'd examined Jennifer thoroughly while Mia and Daniel waited outside the room, their hands clasped together without either of them quite remembering how that had happened. And when he'd emerged, his prognosis had been cautiously optimistic. The TPA had worked and the clot was dissolving, but Jennifer had definitely suffered brain damage, and they wouldn't know the extent of it until she woke up. Could be minimal, could be significant. They'd have to wait and see. The words had settled over Mia like a shroud, but Daniel had squeezed her hand and said quietly, "She's a fighter. If anyone can come back from this, it's your mother." Now as they pulled up to a building that looked like something out of a magazine, all glass and steel and modern architecture, Mia felt overwhelmingly out of place. A doorman in a navy uniform rushed to open her door, and Daniel came around to help her out, his hand warm and steady on her back as he guided her through the marble lobby toward a bank of elevators. They rode up in silence to the penthouse floor, and when the doors opened directly into Daniel's apartment, Mia felt her jaw drop. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Central Park, the early morning light making the trees glow green and gold. The living room alone was bigger than her entire apartment building. Everything was cream and white and expensive-looking, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her mother made in a year, abstract art on the walls that Mia didn't understand, but somehow knew was important. "I know this is a lot," Daniel said quietly, watching her take it all in, "and I know you're exhausted and scared and probably want your mom. But right now, this is the safest place for you, and I promise I'm going to take care of you until she's better, okay?" He led her down a hallway lined with closed doors and opened one to reveal a bedroom that made Mia's breath catch. It was decorated in shades of blue and white, with a huge bed covered in soft pillows and a bookshelf filled with what looked like hundreds of books and a window seat that looked out over the park. This was going to be, Daniel's voice caught, and he had to clear his throat. "This was going to be a guest room, but I never got around to furnishing it properly. We can fix it up however you want. Make it yours. For now, though, you should try to get some sleep." Mia shook her head stubbornly even though her eyes were burning with exhaustion. "I can't sleep. What if the hospital calls? What if Mama wakes up?" But even as she said it, she swayed on her feet, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally wearing off, and Daniel caught her elbow to steady her. His touch was gentle, careful, like he was afraid she might break if he held on too tight. "Tell you what," he said, and there was something in his voice that reminded Mia of how her mother sounded when she was trying to convince Mia to do something for her own good. "Why don't you lie down for just a little while and I'll stay right here with you. I'll keep my phone on, and if the hospital calls, I'll wake you immediately. But you need rest, Mia. You've been through something traumatic tonight and your body needs time to process it. Your mom would want you to take care of yourself." And because Mia was 8 years old and terrified and exhausted beyond belief, and because something about Daniel Harrison made her feel safe in a way she couldn't quite explain, she nodded and let him guide her to the enormous bed. She climbed under the covers, still wearing her pajamas, and Daniel pulled a soft blanket up over her, tucking it around her shoulders with surprising gentleness. For someone who claimed he'd never been a father before, he settled into a chair beside the bed, close enough that she could reach out and touch him if she needed to, and pulled out his phone. "Sleep," he said softly. "I'll be right here, I promise." And despite everything, despite the fear gnawing at her insides and the questions burning in her brain, and the terrible knowledge that her mother might never wake up, might never be the same, might leave her alone in this world, Mia felt her eyes start to close. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Daniel's profile silhouetted against the window, his face turned toward the rising sun, and she thought maybe this was what having a father felt like. Maybe this was what she'd been missing all along. When Mia woke, it was to the smell of coffee and pancakes and voices speaking in low, urgent tones somewhere nearby. For one confused moment, she didn't know where she was. The room too big and too bright and too clean. And then everything came rushing back and she sat up so fast her head spun. The hospital, her mother, the stroke, Daniel Harrison, who might be her father. She scrambled out of bed and followed the voices down the hallway toward what turned out to be an enormous kitchen with marble countertops and stainless steel appliances and windows that flooded the space with afternoon light. Afternoon. How long had she slept? Daniel was standing by the counter talking to a woman Mia had never seen before, middle-aged with sharp eyes and an expensive pantsuit, and they both turned when Mia appeared in the doorway. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice gentler than it had been when he was talking to the woman. "How are you feeling?" "I made pancakes." "Well, actually, I attempted pancakes. They're not great, but they're edible." He gestured to a plate stacked with pancakes that did look slightly lopsided but smelled amazing, and Mia's stomach growled loudly because she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Any news about Mama? That was all Mia cared about. The only thing that mattered, and she saw Daniel's face tighten slightly before he shook his head. "She's still unconscious but stable. They called about an hour ago with an update. No changes yet, but Dr. Morrison said that's not necessarily bad. Sometimes the body just needs time to heal." He pulled out a chair at the kitchen island and patted it. "Come eat something. You need fuel. And this is Miss Margaret Walsh. She's my attorney. We have some things we need to discuss." The woman, Margaret, gave Mia a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello, Mia. I'm sorry we're meeting under such difficult circumstances. I need to ask you some questions if that's okay, just to help us understand the situation better." Mia climbed onto the chair and accepted the plate of pancakes that Daniel slid in front of her, along with butter and syrup and a glass of orange juice, and she started eating while Margaret pulled out a tablet and stylus and sat across from her. "First question, do you have a birth certificate? Do you know where your mother keeps important documents?" Mia swallowed a mouthful of pancake and thought about it. "There's a metal box under Mama's bed. She keeps all the important papers there. Birth certificate and social security card and the lease and stuff like that." She took another bite, the food settling warm and solid in her stomach, grounding her. "Why do you need to know?" But she thought she knew the answer already, could see where this was going. Daniel wanted proof, wanted to know for certain if she was his daughter or if this was all some horrible mistake or elaborate con. "We need to establish paternity," Margaret said bluntly, and Daniel shot her a sharp look but didn't contradict her. "If Mr. Harrison is indeed your biological father, there are legal steps we need to take to ensure he has the right to make decisions about your welfare and your mother's medical care, especially given that your mother is currently incapacitated and there's no one else to act as your guardian." She tapped something on her tablet and showed it to Daniel. "I've already contacted a judge who owes me a favor. We can get an emergency custody order by end of business today based on the circumstances, but we'll need a DNA test to confirm biological relationship within 72 hours. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face, and Mia noticed that he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes and stubble on his jaw like he hadn't slept at all after putting her to bed. "How fast can we get the DNA results?" he asked, and Margaret consulted her tablet again. "If we use one of the private labs and pay for expedited processing, 48 hours. Maybe sooner if I make it clear this is an emergency situation involving a child's welfare." Daniel nodded slowly and turned to look at Mia, his blue eyes searching her face. "Would that be okay with you? A DNA test? It doesn't hurt. They just swab the inside of your cheek with what looks like a Q-tip. Takes about 5 seconds. Will it tell us for sure?" Mia asked, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "Will it tell us if you're really my daddy, or if this is all a mistake?" Because as much as she wanted it to be true, wanted this man with his kind eyes and his gentle hands and his determination to take care of her to really be her father, she was also terrified that the test would come back negative and she'd be alone again. Better not to hope too hard, better not to want too much, because wanting things had never gotten her anywhere except disappointed. Daniel's face did something complicated, and then he was moving around the island and crouching down beside her chair, so they were at eye level. "Mia, I want you to listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice intense. "No matter what that test says, no matter what piece of paper tells us about genetics and biology, you are not alone. Do you understand me? Even if by some miracle you turn out not to be mine, though honestly, you look so much like my sister at your age that I'd bet my entire company you are, I'm not just going to abandon you. You called me when you were scared and needed help. And that means something to me. That means you're my responsibility now, whether we share DNA or not." But Mia started to protest, but Daniel cut her off, his hands coming up to frame her face gently, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "No buts. You're 8 years old, and your mother is in the hospital, and you shouldn't have to worry about being alone or where you're going to sleep or who's going to take care of you. That's my job now. I'm choosing to make it my job, and when I choose something, I don't back down. Ask anyone who's ever done business with me. I'm stubborn as hell, and I don't quit, ever. So you're stuck with me, kid. DNA test or no DNA test. Mia felt something break open in her chest, some hard protective shell she'd been carrying around without even knowing it was there. And suddenly she was crying in earnest, big gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel didn't hesitate, just pulled her off the chair and into his arms and held her while she cried, one hand rubbing circles on her back and the other cradling her head against his shoulder. He murmured things she couldn't quite make out, soothing nonsense words that didn't mean anything except, "I'm here and you're safe and everything's going to be okay." And Mia clung to him like a drowning person clings to a life raft. Maybe this was what having a father felt like. Maybe this was what she'd been missing her whole life, this solid, steady presence that made her feel like the world wasn't quite so scary after all. When the tears finally subsided, Mia pulled back and wiped her face on her sleeve, suddenly embarrassed. "Sorry," she mumbled. But Daniel shook his head and handed her a napkin from the counter. "Don't apologize for having feelings," he said firmly. "You've been through hell in the last 12 hours. You're allowed to fall apart. That's what I'm here for, to catch you when you fall and help put you back together again." He stood up and ran a hand through his already messy hair. "Now finish your pancakes while I talk to Margaret about the legal stuff, and then we're going back to the hospital to check on your mom. Sound good?" Mia nodded and turned back to her plate, but she was only half listening to the conversation between Daniel and his attorney because her mind was racing with questions and fears and hopes she didn't dare name. If Daniel really was her father, why had her mother run away? What had she been so afraid of that she'd chosen to raise a child alone in poverty rather than tell him the truth? Had she thought he wouldn't want them? Or had she been trying to protect them from something? From his world, maybe? From the life of privilege and pressure that seemed to surround him like an invisible force field? And most importantly, what would happen when Jennifer woke up and found out that all her carefully constructed secrets had come crashing down? The DNA test was done that afternoon by a technician who came to the apartment, and Margaret assured them they'd have results by Monday at the latest. Then Daniel bundled Mia into his car again, and they drove back to Mount Sinai West, back to the hospital room where Jennifer Davis lay unconscious, her face still slack on one side, but her vital signs holding steady. Dr. Morrison was there doing his afternoon rounds, and he gave them an update that sounded like it was written in a foreign language. Words like neuroplasticity and deficit mapping and rehabilitation protocols. The summary version was that Jennifer's brain was trying to heal itself, but it was too early to know how successful that healing would be. Mia sat beside her mother's bed for hours, holding her hand and talking to her in a steady stream of chatter about nothing and everything. She told her mother about Daniel's apartment and the pancakes and the DNA test and how scared she was, but also how maybe things might be okay. She told her about school and her friends and the art project she'd been working on before everything went wrong. She talked until her throat was raw and her voice was hoarse, and Daniel finally insisted she'd take a break and have some dinner in the hospital cafeteria. They were sitting at a plastic table eating mediocre pizza when Daniel's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his face went tight. "I need to take this," he said, and Mia watched as he walked a few steps away and answered with a clipped Harrison. She couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see Daniel's body language shift, shoulders going rigid and jaw clenching, and when he spoke, his voice had gone cold and flat in a way that made Mia shiver. "I don't care about the Tokyo negotiations right now. No, you don't understand. There's a family emergency, because I just found out I might have a daughter. Robert, that's why. No, I will not be available for conference calls this weekend. Handle it yourself or postpone it, I don't care which." He hung up and stood there for a moment with his back to her, one hand braced against the wall and his head bowed like he was trying to collect himself. When he turned back, his face was carefully blank, but Mia could see the strain around his eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked tentatively, and Daniel gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's fine. Just work stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." He sat back down and picked up his pizza, but Mia noticed he didn't actually eat any of it, just pushed it around his plate while his mind was clearly somewhere else. "You don't have to do this, you know," Mia said quietly, surprising herself. "Take care of me, I mean. If it's messing up your work and stuff, I can go to foster care or whatever until Mama wakes up. I don't want to be a burden." The words tasted like poison coming out, but she forced them out anyway because she needed to give him an escape route, needed to make sure he wasn't just staying out of obligation or guilt or because he felt trapped. Daniel's head snapped up and he stared at her with an expression somewhere between horror and fury. "Don't," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. "Don't you dare. You are not a burden, Mia. You are a person a human being who deserves to be cared for and protected and loved. And if you are my daughter, which I'm about 99% certain you are, then you're the most important thing in the world to me right now. More important than work. More important than negotiations or deals or profit margins. Do you understand? He reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it tight. Family comes first, always. That's the rule I was raised with, even if my actual family wasn't very good at following it. And it's the rule I'm going to live by now. So no more talk about foster care or being a burden. You're mine, and I take care of what's mine. Mia felt her eyes burn with fresh tears, but she blinked them back and nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They finished their dinner in silence and went back up to Jennifer's room, where nothing had changed. Her mother still slept, unreachable, while the machines beeped and hummed and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Daniel pulled up 2 chairs, and they sat vigil together, not speaking, just being present in case Jennifer needed them when she finally fought her way back to consciousness. It was nearly midnight when Mia finally fell asleep in her chair, her head tipping sideways to rest against Daniel's shoulder. He didn't move, didn't want to wake her, just sat there in the darkened hospital room and thought about how his life had completely imploded in the space of 12 hours. Yesterday he'd been Daniel Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries, one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country, 34 years old and supposedly at the top of his game. His biggest concerns had been the Tokyo expansion and the quarterly earnings call, and whether he should fire his VP of operations for incompetence. Today, he was apparently a father, had been a father for 8 years without knowing it, without getting to experience any of the moments that made parenthood real. First words and first steps and first days of school, all stolen from him by Jennifer's decision to disappear without a trace. He should be furious with her, should be planning what he was going to say when she woke up, how he was going to make her understand what she'd taken from him. But looking at Mia sleeping against his shoulder, feeling the trust implicit in that gesture, all he could think was that he needed Jennifer to wake up. Needed her to be okay, not just for Mia's sake, but for his own, because he had 8 years of questions that only she could answer. And if she died before he got those answers, he thought it might actually break him. His phone buzzed with an incoming text, and Daniel glanced at it one-handed, careful not to disturb Mia. Margaret. Got the emergency custody order. You're Mia's legal guardian as of 6 p.m. today, pending paternity confirmation. Also pulled Jennifer's records. No life insurance, no will, no next of kin listed anywhere. It really was just the 2 of them. Call me in the morning and we'll discuss long-term arrangements. Daniel closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the wall. Long-term arrangements, as if this was just another business problem to solve, another negotiation to win. But it wasn't business, was it? It was life. It was a little girl who'd had her entire world destroyed in the space of one night, who'd had to watch her mother collapse and not know if she'd ever wake up again. It was a woman he'd once loved, still loved, if he was being honest with himself, had never stopped loving even after 8 years of silence, lying broken in a hospital bed. It was a future that looked nothing like the carefully ordered life he'd built for himself, full of chaos and uncertainty and responsibility he had no idea how to handle. But Daniel Harrison hadn't built a billion-dollar company by backing down from challenges. He'd done it by facing problems head-on, by refusing to accept defeat, by working harder and smarter than everyone else until he won. And he would win this too. He'd figure out how to be a father to Mia. He'd make sure Jennifer got the best medical care money could buy. He'd untangle the mess of secrets and lies that had kept them apart for 8 years. And when it was all over, when Jennifer was better and Mia was safe and the dust had settled, maybe they could finally have the conversation they should have had 8 years ago. Maybe they could figure out if there was still something worth saving between them, or if too much time and hurt and betrayal had passed for them to ever find their way back to each other. A sound from the bed made him look up sharply. Jennifer's fingers had twitched, just slightly, but it was movement where there hadn't been movement before. Daniel's heart kicked into overdrive, and he carefully shifted Mia off his shoulder, laying her down across 2 chairs so she could sleep more comfortably, before moving to Jennifer's bedside. "Jen?" he said softly, his hand hovering over hers, not sure if he should touch her. "Can you hear me? If you can hear me, try to move your fingers again." For a long moment, nothing happened, and Daniel wondered if he'd imagined it, if his exhausted brain had conjured movement where there was none. But then her eyelids fluttered once, twice, and slowly opened. Her brown eyes were unfocused at first, confused, trying to make sense of where she was and why everything felt wrong. They tracked around the room, taking in the hospital equipment and the IV lines and the fluorescent lights. And then they landed on Daniel and went wide with shock and something that might have been fear. "Daniel?" Her voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse and slurred on one side, where her face hadn't recovered full function yet. "What? How are you? Where's Mia?" The last two words came out in a panic and she tried to sit up, but Daniel gently pressed her back down, his hands shaking with relief and anger, and a tangle of emotions he couldn't begin to sort out. "Mia's fine. She's right here. She's sleeping," he said, gesturing to where their daughter lay curled up on the chairs. "She's the one who saved your life, Jen. She called 911 when you collapsed. Or actually," and his voice went hard, "she tried to call 911, but she was scared and shaking and accidentally called me instead. And do you know what she said when I answered? She called me Daddy. She asked me to come help her mama because she thought I was her father." And imagine my surprise, Jennifer, when I got to the hospital and saw this 8-year-old girl who has my eyes and my sister's hair and the exact same scar I got falling off my bike when I was 6. Jennifer's face crumpled and tears started sliding down her cheeks, moving normally on one side and struggling against partially paralyzed muscles on the other. "I can explain," she whispered, but Daniel cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Not now. Right now you need to rest and recover, and we need to call the doctors because you just woke up from a stroke, and that's the most important thing. But later, when you're stronger, we are going to have a very long conversation about why you thought it was okay to disappear with my child and let me believe for 8 years that I didn't have a daughter. We're going to talk about every decision you made and every lie you told and every moment you stole from me." His voice broke on the last words, and he had to stop and take a breath. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'm sorry," Jennifer sobbed. And even through her impaired speech, Daniel could hear the anguish in her voice. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you didn't want that life, and I was trying to protect you, and I know that sounds stupid now, but I was scared and young, and I didn't know what else to do." She reached for him with her good hand, and Daniel pulled back instinctively, not ready to let her touch him, not ready to forgive her when the betrayal was still so raw and fresh. "Just rest," he said, his voice cold. "I'm going to get Dr. Chen and let her know you're awake. Mia will be thrilled when she wakes up and sees you're conscious again. Try not to think too hard about anything else right now. Your brain needs time to heal." He turned to leave, but Jennifer's voice stopped him, thick with tears and medication and paralysis, but still so achingly familiar it made his chest hurt. "I never stopped loving you," she said. "I need you to know that. Everything I did because I loved you too much to trap you. But I was wrong. I can see that now. I was so wrong about everything, and I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry." And despite everything, despite his anger and his hurt and his absolute fury at what she'd done, Daniel felt something in him soften because he knew Jennifer Davis, and he knew she didn't say those words lightly. She'd rather cut out her own tongue than admit she was wrong about something, had always been stubborn and proud to a fault. If she was apologizing now, it meant she really meant it. Meant she understood the magnitude of what she'd done and the damage it had caused. But it wasn't enough. An apology wasn't enough to fix 8 years of missed moments and lies, and the fact that he'd had to find out he was a father because his daughter accidentally called him thinking he was 911. So he just nodded once, curtly, and walked out of the room to find Dr. Chen and tell her that her patient was awake. Behind him, he heard Jennifer start to cry in earnest, broken sobs that were muffled against her pillow, and every instinct in him screamed to go back and comfort her. But he didn't. He kept walking, because some wounds were too deep to heal with just an apology, and this was one of them.